The sun was shining, the wind was brisk, and the morning had a sharp, clean feel to it that gave a man the optimistic impression that life was worth living and that much of value could be achieved with a little necessary effort. The weather was ideal for sailing, and the mercenary spearman, Ealdred of the Paega, was refusing to permit the contrariness of the Gathkari boatman to spoil his good mood. The veteran had found his boat, a 40-foot fishing sloop with a reinforced hull, oddly named Refugio, that was sturdy enough to let Hengustir stand in its centre without capsizing the craft. They might have herded 3 or 4 horses of ordinary size into the sloop, and Ealdred was confident that the warhorse would be safe aboard. The boatman would take them no further than the port of Citadel in the barony of Longelay, but that was all that Ealdred would ask of him, just to be rid of Gathkar, even if it meant being in Gelton and therefore enemy territory. Along with Fortress, Citadel was one of 2 heavily fortified buccaneer strongholds that sent ships forth to raid and plunder for the sea barons of Longelay, a fiefdom that relied heavily on lawfully sanctioned piracy for its wealth. The barony had its own ways of doing things, which had ensured that they had taken no part in the recent battle of Proctor's Whale against the Engle. The Anglian was not worried that the sailors of Longelay would refuse him passage on a ship sailing west, not when he had gold in his purse. No, the only problem was that this Gathkari boatman had no official permission to take to sea. There had been gross disorder during the night. Some crime of terrible enormity had taken place, and the political administration of Porta Aberta was suffering a form of paralysis. Very few administrators had shown up for work this morning, and their offices were closed. The Anglian had heard something of what had happened from the gossip in the streets about an attack upon the Temple of Artemis. He'd overheard 2 Bourbon wool merchants giggling over the news that all the priestesses had been murdered or raped, and the temple burned to the ground. Now all the Bantu and the Murgle and the Telitzim in the city were bragging that they would do as much to every temple in Gathkar, and the Akrani military were mobilizing to formally annex the country into their empire. But Ealdred cared nothing for any of that. What he cared about was getting under sail while the wind was high. The boatman, however, could do nothing without the correct bureaucrat's wax seal on the correct piece of parchment. Rather than argue the point, Ealdred cuffed and buffeted the boatman around the head to drive him back into the fishing sloop, the Gathkari all the while apologizing but explaining that it was strictly forbidden to sail without his being authorized to do so. Ealdred kicked the toady on board and demanded that he get under way at once. The meaty fist that the mercenary waved under the boatman's nose was a sufficiently convincing argument. The flustered, whining creature began untying the key ropes and raising the main mast-sail aft. With the big mercenary standing over him, he quickly got the sloop moving, but still he sought to remonstrate that they must go back for authorization. He was not upset at being manhandled, nor at the commandeering of his boat, but he was distraught that they were sailing without official sanction. Ige, whose nerves were a little frayed at having to undertake her first ever sea voyage in her 19 years of life, a daunting prospect, found the boatman's feebleness to be the final straw. She was no longer able to restrain her outrage and temper. She had held her tongue, as her effendi had commanded, all through this country of lunatics, and she had continued to keep her peace even despite the fact that her silence in the camp of the Telitzim merchants had not prevented their being attacked by those traders at the cost of her beautiful black horse, whom she missed as she would miss a brother. Even though this attack proved that holding her tongue did not stop thieves and rogues and other vermin from attempting to rape a poor Mengis girl and kill her master, nonetheless her tongue had been held because her effendi had wished that it be so. But this wheedling coward of a fisherman was more than a daughter of the steppes could stand. Ige was incandescent with frustrated wrath. She poured the vitriol of her foulest language down upon the bowed head of the penitent Gathkari in a ceaseless torrent of indignant ferocity that was unusually obscene even by her own high standards of abusive swearing. Hardly stopping to breathe, she lashed him with a tirade of insulting invective that she had been bursting to release since she had ridden through Fari. The remorseful fisherman could not understand a word of this string of ripe and fruity Bengali name-calling, but knowing himself to be inferior in both sex and ethnicity to a woman who was so obviously foreign, his religious beliefs meant that he was in a position to do nothing but accept her scolding admonitions as justified and righteous. When the teenage Mengis, red in the face and shaking her little fists at him and at the whole of his cursed country, finally ran out of her extensive catalogue of rebukes, recriminations, reprimands, and reproaches, she threw her head back and shouted to the heavens to sweep these blasphemous female-worshipping Gathkaris from the face of the earth. Then she spat, juicily, onto the top of the man's bowed head, and stared at him with murderous intent as the fishing boat slowly pulled out to sea.